The oceans were never truly discovered by Europe. They were seized. European voyages weren't about enlightenment, they were expeditions of extraction. They didn't traverse the waters to learn, they crossed them to claim. Their nautical milestones weren't triumphs, they were ledgers of theft, invasion, and violence, repackaged as valor for 5 centuries. The seas were never barren, never unclaimed, never theirs. Yet Europe treated them like an open vault, free to ransack, rebrand, weaponize, and litter with wreckage. Long before European sails appeared, the oceans were already mapped, navigated, and named, just not by them. While Europe struggled to construct seaworthy vessels, Africa, Asia, and Oceania commanded the waves. African maritime empires flourished. From the 9th to the 16th centuries, Swahili city-states like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Malindi dominated Indian Ocean trade, connecting East Africa to India, Arabia, and China. Madagascar's Austronesian sailors mastered monsoon winds across vast distances. Centuries before Europe's first timid expeditions, Mali's ruler Abubakari II allegedly launched 2,000 ships into the Atlantic, a feat erased from colonial records. The Indian Ocean was a bustling trade network long before Europe arrived. By 500 BCE, Malay and Tamil sailors charted routes between Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. Zheng He's 15th century treasure fleet spanned 30 nations, his ships dwarfing Columbus's vessels fivefold. China used magnetic compasses and printed navigational guides in the 11th century, while Europe still feared sea monsters at the world's edge. So when the Portuguese arrived, it wasn't exploration, it was hijacking. Portuguese and Spanish explorers were pirates with state backing. Columbus, the ocean's first European criminal. He discovered nothing. His voyage was a navigational blunder, landing him in the Bahamas by accident, where he promptly enslaved and brutalized the Taino. His calculations were flawed, his maps stolen, his mission bankrolled by debt. The result? Within decades, 90% of the Caribbean's indigenous population perished. While Spain declared sovereignty overseas, it couldn't sail without indigenous guidance. Vasco da Gama, a pirate draped in piety. Upon reaching Calicut in 1498, he bombarded ports, hijacked trade, and once burned 400 Muslim pilgrims alive on a ship. Portugal's strategy wasn't commerce, it was coastal terrorism, sanctified by papal decrees like the 1493 Inter Caetera, fabricating their right to the waves. The doctrine of discovery was just holy paperwork for maritime robbery. The so-called Age of Sail was the age of enslavement, piracy, and insurance fraud. The transatlantic slave trade was an aquatic cartel. 12.5 million Africans trafficked in floating tombs, with 20% dying en route. In 1781, British slavers drowned 130 Africans off the Zong to claim insurance. The entire system thrived on maritime law, sugar profits, and naval enforcement. This wasn't trade, it was state-sanctioned kidnapping. Basque whalers pillaged indigenous Arctic hunting grounds. By the 1600s, French and English fleets had stripped Newfoundland's cod fisheries bare. European maps whitewashed indigenous coasts, renaming landmarks to legitimize theft. Their cartography was conquest, their navigation was occupation. Europe's true maritime legacy? Militarization. The Royal Navy wasn't a guardian of the seas, it was an imperial enforcer. By the 1700s, its guns protected shipments of stolen cotton, opium, and enslaved people. Every East India Company route was secured at cannon point, every treaty signed under duress. Batch 2, rewritten. Europe never conquered the waves, they terrorized them into submission. What they called maritime law was simply robbery with legal backing. Britain crafted admiralty codes specifically to legitimize hijacking vessels and outlawing indigenous seafaring traditions. The 17th century's so-called freedom of the seas doctrine was really just Holland's excuse to plunder Asian spice routes. Even today's United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea framework continues favoring former colonial powers' naval and economic interests. European ocean governance followed the same colonial playbook, codifying theft as policy. Contemporary exploitation now wears different masks: illegal fishing, ecological destruction, and corporate extraction. While regulating others, Europe continues draining marine resources. EU vessels account for 40% of illegal fishing operations along Africa's coasts. Spanish and French trawlers systematically strip West African waters while arresting local fishermen for small-scale catches. Meanwhile, these same nations impose strict environmental regulations on global South nations whose waters they've already devastated. Today, British and Norwegian corporations lead the charge in deep-sea mining, threatening ecosystems they never bothered to study. North Sea oil profits fueled Britain's 1980s economic revival while poisoning surrounding waters for generations. European companies dump toxic e-waste along African and South Asian shorelines, then market it as sustainable development. The methods have evolved from sales to statutes, from cannons to carbon credits, but the theft continues. Only now it wears a suit and files paperwork. Before colonization, oceans were revered commons, meticulously charted and sustainably shared across continents. Indigenous navigation honored ecological balance rather than enforced domination. Maritime wisdom grew from environmental understanding, not imperial ambition. Post-European contact, sea lanes became human trafficking routes. Celestial navigation transformed into a tool for systematic looting. What Europe branded as maritime law was simply imperial justification dressed in legal Latin. They framed it as discovery. In reality, they perfected global plunder via aquatic highways. They never tamed the sea. They just industrialized its exploitation. They weaponized it, rebranded it, charted it, and walked away from the ecological wreckage. When Europeans romanticize their nautical history, ask this: if they were such brilliant mariners, why is the only treasure they ever retrieved from the ocean's stolen property